You had a thread. I mean, there's a general thread, but I thought it was a pretty important one to remind people of in terms of, and particularly at a time where the Supreme Court is pretty iffy on the Voting Rights Act. And it was about Mississippi and the disenfranchisement of folks who have been convicted of a crime and served time in prison. Walk us through this dynamic and what states are really this is becoming this is or continues to be a big issue.
Yeah, no, it's super important. I think, at Bolts we cover elections and what's at stake, what's on the ballot, what people can influence. I think we always try and keep in mind the conditions on which they're voting and how many people are excluded. And our reporter Alex Burness wrote effectively a few stories this fall and summer about the people who are left out of the process this fall, because we could always run stories like that in the sense that there's people excluded from the process in almost every state when it comes to criminal convictions. But the states that are specifically voting this fall have the most restrictive, the harshest, the most punitive laws in the nation, pretty much. And I think you're referencing to. I'm thinking about Mississippi, Virginia now, and Kentucky. Mississippi, according to estimates, national estimates, has the highest rate of people who can't vote because of a past criminal conviction. And I mean, the estimate is that 11% of adults in Mississippi are barred from voting because of a past criminal conviction, and because Mississippi bars people who are convicted of some felonies for life. So, my colleague Alex talked to someone who served 1 year in prison for theft about 20 years ago, and was released 20 years ago, and still has not been able to vote. So that's sort of just the scope of the situation is so huge that it just really kind of makes a mockery of the rest of what's going on. I think what the threat was also calling attention to the racism that this is tied to. Originally, Mississippi's system was designed when they drew a state constitution in 1890, and with the very explicit goal in 1890, it was a bunch of white supremacists came together with the goal of finding ways to not allow Black people to vote in Mississippi. And they actually made a list of offenses in 1890 that they thought Black people would be more likely to be convicted of. And those are the ones that people lost the right for life and to vote to life, and everything else was not disqualifying. So that has been modified to some extent over the years, but the basic racism of the criminal legal system still gets imported in the voting rights arena. So right now, 16% of Black adults cannot vote in Mississippi. Which is obviously a staggering rate. And just maybe a quick note, I mentioned Virginia, which I think has this reputation of being more being more democratic than these other states. But the Republican governor there this year ended the policy of automatically restoring the voting rights of people who finish a sentence or who leave prison. So at this moment in Virginia, we're back to a system of losing your right to vote for life for any felony conviction, which is extraordinarily rare by national standards. And the fact that that's happening in Virginia under someone who's tried to build a centrist Republican reputation, I think is very important.
And I think it was McAuliffe had reversed that years ago, and then it's been reinstituted by Youngkin. We should just say, I just want to put a finer point on that Mississippi thing, because this is something that we saw in many states in the the former Confederate slave owning states in the wake of the 15th Amendment, which gave the vote, and you could no longer gave the vote to freed slaves, and you could no longer bar someone from voting based upon race. The name of the game in the wake of Reconstruction was for these states to sort of create a mechanism to, as efficiently as possible, disenfranchise as many Black people, Black men, as possible at that time. And you saw a Supreme Court not terribly dissimilar in disposition to the one that we have now, basically waving that stuff through. And that was sort of law of the land for 70, 75 years until the Voting Rights Act. And now we're sort of, have been rolling that back. But people should understand that's the way it was done. And there was an understanding, I think, at that time, we can't do this, as efficiently as saying we're not going to allow black people to vote. Because we're not allowed to do that because of the federal constitution. But if we can come up with a mechanism where if we disenfranchise poor white people, that's okay. But as long as we end up disenfranchising more black men than white men, we're good. We've picked up some votes. And that's been the strategy for 40 years, essentially, for a lot of these states.
Yeah, I mean, to give you just a sense again of scope in Mississippi, the vast majority of people who have lost the right to vote for life in Mississippi are black. Even though black people represent about 40% or less of the Mississippi population, so that's really the effect now. What's super interesting is that in August there was a surprise decision by a federal court that struck down Mississippi's system of barring people to vote for life, and there was this small moment where it looked like things might be changing, and then the full Fifth Circuit of Appeals stepped in, vacated the ruling, and we're back to where we were now. And it's a very long status quo that dates back to this, like, the 19th century we're discussing. But it's interesting that, like, if you're in Mississippi, cannot vote. The person I was describing earlier who lost the right to vote because of a theft conviction 20 years ago, if you're in their shoes, right, there was this brief moment, this brief glimmer of hope that the doors of the franchise have been opened, that has been taken away. So it's just, it is this very long history, but this constant wave of attacks on the right to vote of people on the ground.